Welcome to RSE for Grown-Ups. Come along with us as we walk you through the relationships and sex education curriculum, otherwise known as RSE.
We will be breaking the curriculum down into manageable key stage chunks and topics. This podcast is for parents, carers, or anyone in a supportive role with young people. We want to support you to feel equipped to support your young people through their journey of life and the highs and lows of growing up. If you're already listening, then it shows you are committed to supporting. I'm Kelsie.
I'm Sophie, and we work for Luton Sexual Health, an NHS sexual health clinic that is commissioned by Public Health as part of the 2040 vision for Luton. So before we get into it, you may be thinking, why does it matter what we say?
So I'll tell you a little bit about myself to start with. My name is Kelsie. I'm the Education and Outreach Lead at Luton Sexual Health. I specialise in supporting vulnerable young people who are at risk of sexual exploitation or vulnerable or exploited women. I went to university and studied to become a youth worker, and I worked for the YMCA as a youth worker for around 7 years. Then I decided to leave being a youth worker and go and train as a teacher. And I worked for Luton Council, teaching young people who were not in education, employment or training. In the middle of all that, lockdown happened and that completely changed to teaching on Zoom. And I kind of found that way of doing things didn't work for me and that I needed to find myself back in a role where I could do more one-to-one support. So about 3 years ago, I went to work for Luton Sexual Health. It is important to share that I have 2 school-age children myself. So I have a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old, a year 8 and a year 3. So I'm going through this journey both personally and professionally with you. Would you like to tell us a bit about how you ended up here too, Sophie?
Yes, I will. Mine's slightly different. My background really is in performing, theatre making, theatre and education. I used to teach English in Italy, but through drama-based games, so putting on performances and shows, and then doing workshops with the children and the young people to help them learn English. Similarly to you, Kelsie, when we had lockdown, it sort of made me reevaluate my whole life. And I actually started writing a blog prior to lockdown about women's health after experiencing my own health issues. Yeah. And I suddenly realised I don't know anything about my own body. And that sort of took me on a deep dive to figure out why that was. And a lot of it came back to the fact I wasn't taught about it at school.
Yeah, definitely.
So I then decided to do an accreditation with ASET UK to become an accredited relationships and sex educator, which I really loved, and sort of that birthed my passion for teaching young people and children about sex and relationships. I started working for Brooke, the sexual health wellbeing charity, and I was in schools every day doing one-to-ones or delivering parts of the RSE curriculum, and just really loved it and enjoyed it. And that led me to Luton Sexual Health, where my dream job was advertised as the under 12s and SEND outreach lead for the outreach team.
Yeah.
And we'll talk a bit more about what that role means, because I know when I say under 12s, it makes people feel a bit like, what?
Everyone starts to panic a little bit.
Yeah. But we are definitely going to talk about that in some coming episodes. And that's why I'm now here working with you and doing this podcast.
That is amazing. So I think we should tell people a little bit more about Luton Sexual Health and about the clinic that we work in. So Luton Sexual Health is an integrated sexual health services. That means that we support people who are living with HIV. We have full range of contraceptive services, STI screening. And actually, as a clinic, we're really lucky to have a dedicated team of outreach support workers. So that's you and I and a few more people. We specialise in supporting young people who have additional needs, who are at risk of exploitation, but also LGBT plus young people, and also young people who are involved in risky sexual behaviour and potentially perpetrators of harmful sexual behaviour. We work with those young people as well. We are really lucky to be commissioned by Public Health and to have this podcast commissioned by Public Health. They trust our ideas for ways of reaching young people. They let us post dances on TikTok and make all sorts of interesting content. But actually a lot of what we do is about the one-to-one support that we give young people, the professionals that we train. And our aim is to just kind of try and provide equitable access to our service for everyone that needs it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good segue into where did the idea for the podcast come from? I think you've already sort of answered it just by explaining about the work that we do.
Yeah.
But where did it come from? Why did we feel like it was necessary? Why is it sort of the next step in our outreach targets and working with the people that we work with?
I think, and you've experienced the same as me, in that we are asked the same questions by professionals, by parents and carers, by young people as well. And we see those same sort of topics come up. And actually, it's really important to remember that growing up, not everybody has had great sex education. Not everybody has all the information that maybe they want to share with their children. Not everybody knows what's on the curriculum, and they're all asking the same question. So we wanted to kind of collate that information, put it together in one place. And obviously there can be quite a lot of controversy about RSE. People might want to take their children out, or we see headlines talking about children as young as 9 learning about gay sex and RSE. And we know that that's not the case. And we know that that's not what we teach. And we know that that's not what teachers are kind of doing in school. So we wanted to kind of cut through the sensationalizing of it all and get down to the facts of what's on the curriculum. Can you explain a little bit more about what we're going to cover and what is on our curriculum and in our agenda?
Yeah. So on the RSE curriculum, relationships and sex education, we will be using RSE a lot, but that's what we mean. It became statutory in 2020, or mandatory, I should say, in 2020. And there is a document of guidelines for staff and teachers to sort of then tailor the needs of their pupils to align with the guidance and what they should be teaching. So it starts at Key Stage 1, and at Key Stage 1, they're not learning about sex, but they're learning about things like, which we are going to cover in one of our next episodes actually. They are learning about what a family looks like, what makes up a family. They're learning about the foundations of a healthy relationship. So someone being caring and trustworthy and kind. They might start learning about boundaries, which will then be a stepping stone to learn about things like consent as they get older, as they journey through school. So it's things like Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2. Those are the foundations of what they'll be doing.
It's like how to be a nice friend, things like that. It's actually quite wholesome really, when you look at it.
It is wholesome. And we've done one-to-one work with children who are that age, and those are the sorts of things we talk about. We also talk about puberty and what happens when we grow up and what that means, and the things that are going to happen to our bodies and our feelings, and what's going to happen within those friendships, starting to navigate conflict, resolving conflict, having healthy boundaries in friendships, all of those sorts of things, and healthy behaviours. And then it sort of goes up to Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4. What can you tell us a tiny bit about what to expect in those episodes where we talk about Key Stage 3 and 4?
Absolutely. So that's when our children and young people are kind of getting into secondary school. We are sharing more information with them about what sex is, and how people are having sex, about how they keep themselves safe when it comes to STIs and contraception, but also about how we talk to them about the risks, and how do we talk to them about consent, about keeping themselves safe, about the law and what the law says about sex and relationships, and actually also what the law says about being online and sharing their information. And that makes up a huge part of the issues when it comes to talking to the older young people about relationships and sex.
And we get lots of questions, I would say, from professionals and parents about being online and what that looks like for this generation. And because we also know that adults do lots of online dating, and it's sort of, and the young people know that it's kind of the norm. It's normal
like how
to them.
People meet nowadays. And actually we need to prepare our young people for the world that they're going into. So it's kind of not good enough to say, don't go online, don't do this, don't do that, you'll put yourself at risk, when actually what we need to do is teach them how to manage and navigate that risk safely. I think it's really important to mention that a lot of parents and teachers struggle to have these conversations with young people because no one was having those conversations with them. We both went to school when Section 28 was in place. Our experience of relationships and sex education would be totally different than what we teach now. And actually that's the same for a lot of teachers. So for anyone that doesn't know, Section 28 was a big legislation that kind of limited what topics could be discussed in schools, what could be covered. It removed anything relating to LGBT from the curriculum, all of those kind of things. And it was kind of a real focus on abstinence-based sex education and just don't do it. And what we know is that doesn't necessarily prepare young people the best.
Yeah. And I think that leads us on to like talk about what the good evidence for RSE is. So the things that are sort of the research that has been done and young people who have been surveyed. And it's actually really important that I think professionals and parents know the good stuff that comes out of teaching young people and children how to keep themselves safe and about their bodies and about their relationships. You know, the evidence suggests that it delays early sex. So people are not going to be necessarily having sex under the age of consent. They're more likely to have sex as well, first time sex with a partner. They're more likely to disclose any harmful behaviors or assault, and they've got the language to explain what's happened to them. Their greater sexual health outcomes, you know, they're being taught how to use contraception properly.
Correctly, it's very important.
I was going to say they're being taught how to use contraception, but Kelsie and I know that actually it's also about how to use it properly and correctly and know how to keep themselves safe. And so they're going to have improved sexual health outcomes, improved, you know, rates of teenage pregnancy, which we don't necessarily see a high number of, but, you know, still it's really important that they're learning how their body works.
And also feeling like they have the opportunity to like be in control of their body and their experience of sex and relationships growing up. Like young people who feel confident talking about sex have better outcomes, whether that is less chance of experiencing non-consensual sex to just having a better, healthier, happier sex life. And like that is important. And obviously as parents, like when we think about what we need to educate our kids on, like I know, to me, the first thing I'm educating my kids on necessarily isn't how to grow up and have a good, happy, healthy sex life. That's not what you're thinking. And we often focus on like the risk and the danger. But actually it's like, this is like a normal part of life. And it's hard and it's difficult and it's challenging. And we basically just want to create a scenario where people feel like either, I don't know, they could listen to our podcast with their children and have a listen to what we're talking about and it might spark some conversation. Or parents might think, oh yeah, okay, I heard them talking about that. Maybe it's time that I had that conversation. I think the other part of this that we're going to look at when we go through the key stages is what is normal sexual behavior? Because we know that the law says young people should not be having sex until they're 16. But we also know that in reality, young people are on their own kind of journey of growing up and discovery. So that might not necessarily be the case. We just want to know what's age appropriate. What risks do we look out for? And then we're going to talk a bit more about like what to do if maybe there is like an extra complication or you do need to get into something around more challenging situations. And we're going to be speaking about how you can talk to your young person as well if they have an additional need of some sort.
Absolutely. We know that from experience that some schools and parents and carers, there is extra sensitivity around that topic and finding the right way to explain sometimes really tricky concepts and understanding to somebody who maybe finds those things really challenging.
Absolutely.
And learning about those things in a classroom environment as well. So it would be great if parents or people who are in a supportive role who have a bit more of one-on-one time with, say, for example, a young person with an additional need, feel really confident to explore that. And I don't mean it necessarily as conversations, but we're going to explore how you have it non-verbally as well through images, pictures, activities, things like that. And I think it's really important what you said about it's not just about scaring young people. It's not necessarily just about prevention and abstinence. You know, we got shown pictures of STIs in schools and things like that.
We don't do that.
We don't do that. It's not necessarily helpful. It's not helpful to know because also many times STIs don't show any symptoms.
Well, that's it. Like we kind of created a generation of young people who deeply believe that unless it looked like a blue waffle, there was no need.
Wrong.
They didn't need to go to the doctor.
Exactly.
They didn't need to take a test because they had no symptoms. And actually, like, a lot of the content that we put out, a lot of the conversations that we have with young people are around like looking after your sexual health is part of self-care.
Yes.
Yeah. Knowing how to look after yourself and manage your health and well-being is part of your self-care. And self-care sometimes is bubble baths and face masks. And sometimes it's swabs and urine samples. It just is what it is.
It just is what it is. Yeah. And I think young people really do want to have those conversations. I saw something that was published in the British Medical Journal about how young people, how they wanted to speak about RSE in schools. And actually as well, young people do want to learn from their parents and their carers. Yeah. They predominantly want to learn from their teachers and from their parents and carers. Otherwise, they are learning it from maybe not very reliable sources.
Yeah, from the internet.
From the internet.
And we are going to talk about that in its whole own episode, raising young people on the internet.
But they want to know about that. They want to focus on consent and choice and their sexual well-being. And I thought the fact that young people have termed sexual well-being as something that they want to get out of RSE, we need to listen to that.
Yeah.
And we need to acknowledge it. And, you know, we're not here to say that it's really easy, you know, as well, firsthand, as a parent of 2 young children. So it'd be really helpful to hear your stories as well of how you navigate those questions, which you're already getting asked.
Definitely.
And sometimes it's really random and it comes out of nowhere and you're not prepared.
There's never warning. So they'll walk in from school and say, I heard about this today. Can we talk about this? Or they just won't tell you anything. Or, well, actually, you know, my son is 12 and he likes to ring after school and have an in-depth conversation about whatever he's learned that day. So last week it was a knife crime event. But sometimes it's about sex education. Sometimes it's about a painter that he learned about in art. But it's always good to take those opportunities and kind of like capture them when you can. And actually, like, I know that when I was growing up, a lot of the conversations that I had like with my mum were in the car. Can't go anywhere, but we're just sort of not facing each other. We're just in the car driving along. And that's when she would, I guess, have talks with me about things that I needed to know about and to understand. And it's just about taking the moments when you can find them. Yeah. And actually, I think when we think about teachers and the situations they're in, and they're responsible for a lot, their workload maybe within education has got greater. Sometimes they provide mental health support, sexual health. Sometimes they're trying to support young people with their financial well-being, as well as being there to educate them. But if you are not trained to or used to or confident standing up in front of 30 young people and talking about sex and relationships, it can be really daunting. Like sometimes we go to do assemblies or drop down days and there's 120 kids in front of us and you're like, oh my gosh, how am I going to stand here and talk about revenge porn? But we do. And hopefully us sharing our experience of how we manage that will help to support other people to kind of think, okay, I can have this conversation. It's not the end of the world, or maybe here's how I bring it up, or here's how I navigate it. Yeah.
And I think a lot of the time in school, you have a variety of teachers, a variety of kids.
Yes.
Lots of different personal views, lots of different family values.
Yeah.
And that's something we're also going to explore, isn't it? How to navigate that, because I understand for some people that's also really overwhelming. It's not just teaching the content, it's what am I going to receive back? Is there going to be dispute between the young people? Like how do I manage all of those feelings and all of those questions at once?
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think teachers don't want to overstep boundaries. Teachers don't want to upset parents or caregivers. They want to go to work and teach, but they are also responsible for teaching the curriculum. And what we're going to explain is what exactly is on the curriculum. Okay. So there's no sort of controversy about, is it okay to say this? Is it okay to say that? We're not going to do a specific episode on LGBTQ plus content, because as the national curriculum goes, that's kind of embedded into all of it. And there isn't a specific lesson for those groups of people. You might not know who needs to be in that lesson. They might not know who needs to be in that lesson. But actually understanding safer sex and healthier relationships is really important, regardless of someone's gender, sexuality, whether they are neurodivergent, whether they have an additional need. Yeah. We just got to know how to have those conversations with everyone, really.
Yeah. What are some of the things that young people have said to us about why they need to learn about relationships and sex education. Like, why is it important? Because we get asked that.
Yeah.
We've been in lessons, we've been in assemblies, group workshops where there's just one young person who goes, I don't need to know this stuff yet. I'm too young, or this isn't relevant to me. So why am I learning about it? And like, how do we answer those questions? And also, like, we do get that sometimes from parents and caregivers who are, I think, coming from a place of wanting to protect their young person.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they think, why do they need to learn about that right now? Is that not going to give them ideas, or is that not going to sexualize them early, or is that not going to make them go and then look for something online? So what's our answers?
Or I guess, so evidence does suggest that young people who have comprehensive sex education are more likely to have delayed first sex. So the better your sex education, the more you understand, kind of takes a little bit of the curiosity out of the whole situation. And you feel kind of like, okay, I know about this. I don't need to rush into it. That's one part of it that's really important. The second part is, and we actually had a young person say this to us in assembly recently at a school in Luton. Young people are kind of surrounded by sex and nudity.
I think he said desensitized.
He said desensitized, yeah, he did.
Desensitized to it, yeah.
And that was to a group of like year 10s and year 11s. And he said, oh, the thing is, miss, we're just desensitized to it. Like, and we were talking about sending and receiving nudes and explicit images. And it really stuck with me, because I thought, you're right. They are like, you only need to go on social media and you can see half naked people just by scrolling through your feed. Like, and conversations might not be exactly what we think our young people are up to. I think the thing is, we do want to protect children, and we do need to protect children and young people, but hiding information from them isn't necessarily the best way to protect them.
And I think it's the preparing aspect of, we will, and this is what we will speak about, especially when we go through the key stage chunks of what's appropriate and what they need to know and what maybe can wait, until the next key stage or until they're ready, because each individual learner is completely different. But when I look at my own personal education, I would have liked to learn, for example, what my period is and why I have it before my period starts. Things like that I think are really important, to learn about your body changing before it starts changing. And then you just feel embarrassment because you start puberty and you have no idea why all these things start
like
happening.
You're in this body that is like, oh my God,
is not known
mine.
to you. And that's why we do teach in Key Stage 4. We start talking about safer sex and contraception and what are their options, because at the end of the day, information is power, knowledge is power. That's the saying, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it.
And there's so much misinformation for all the social media apps, and we get young people asking us, but if I have an implant, is it going to travel to my heart? I've seen a baby being born holding a coil. And it's like, those are the things that they are being exposed to on the internet. Some of them probably really horrific and graphic and quite traumatizing.
Yeah, definitely.
And they think that is then like a complete no-go.
Yeah.
So, and they're not going to talk to anyone about it because it's like so horrible and horrific, and they just want to, get away from it, bury their heads in the sand a little bit. And that's why it's so important that we have these conversations, just really frank, matter of fact. Don't need to add your own personal opinion, whether you're a parent, a caregiver, a teacher, just the facts. That's what they need. Yeah,
I think that's a really good point. And I also think that young people, like you said, are going to go looking for information regardless. So if you don't tell it to them, Google will, AI will, in a new world, ChatGPT will answer your kids' questions if you won't. So if you do want to have some element of control over what they are doing, make them feel like they can talk to you about things. Make them feel like if they ask you a question, then you're not going to just like palm them off with a silly answer. And it is really important for young people to know about contraception and to not believe myths on the internet. I feel like I should explain a little bit more about myself and add it to my bio in that just go back to that about me section and add in that I actually got pregnant in the middle of my second and third year at university. I was on the pill when I fell pregnant with my child, who is now almost 13, and I handed in my dissertation 8 days before my son was born. So I do understand why it's important to have those conversations. And my mum was good at talking about sex and relationships, but I still didn't really understand like how the pill worked. Like if I understood how it worked, then I would have understood why it was important to take it every day. Like those kind of things.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of like why it puts us in this position where we're like, okay, we have this knowledge, we have this information. Like, how are we going to share it?
Yeah, it's so important because we also meet people who have actually had babies.
Yeah.
That only by coming to us and understanding contraception, understand how they got pregnant.
Yes.
You know, that is actually what we do deal with.
Yeah, definitely.
Quite regularly. And like just going back to my about me, you know, I am more than willing to share that I did not know anything really at all.
No.
The different names for my genitals, my anatomy. I had to go looking for it. I had to search it. And that was only because I had health issues.
Yeah.
And to be a young person now, I feel like actually they're kind of really lucky to have a bit more of a positive scope on RSE. There are more people willing to talk about it.
Yep.
They have things like this to listen to. So like, let's embrace it and let's talk about it all together.
And I think every young person I've ever gone to see, every young person I've ever sat with and done one-to-one supports or had in a small group lesson, I'm not going to say that every child I've ever had in a group of 30, because that is definitely not true.
Not true.
But every young person that I've worked with has really kind of benefited from getting into it and actually feeling free to ask and free to find out a bit more and free to like really explore what they want to know and like ask those questions and have those conversations, and they kind of really get a lot out of it. So hopefully a lot of adults, grown-ups, this is a podcast for grown-ups as well, not just for the young people.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll learn something about their own body, about their own sexual health or about their own sort of relationships. Just from what we're talking about and listening to us have this conversation.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to be doing at the end of every week as well. We're going to ask you guys, I should talk to you, ask you guys a question, anything that you would like answering to do with relationships and sex education, the curriculum, a question that you've been asked by your young person, a concern or a worry that you have. We'd really like to answer that at the end of each episode. So we'll talk about what we're going to talk about, which next time will be starting at the very beginning with Key Stage 1. And then, we'll answer a question that you have. So please do send them to us on Instagram.
Yeah. Amazing. We'll put up question boxes and people can share our questions, and we can also share some of the wild and wonderful questions that
we've got so many
get asked from young people.
Have we got any actually that we could end on today? Like a really wild question, just so that you all feel like we are in here in the trenches with you.
Do you want really wild?
Yeah.
Okay, let's tell you a story. So before I worked in sexual health, when I was working as a youth worker, I was running a club that was for young people up to 14. And one day, this is full on, one day I had a young boy say to me, we could put questions in the box. They could all chuck their questions in a box and we would get them out and answer them. So this guy, I pulled out his question in front of everybody, pick it out, and he said, I watched a video where a guy made his stuff come out on a girl's face. Is that legal? Okay. And like, forever. This kid was 12. He had obviously been exposed to something which was not age appropriate, which was not what like he should be seeing.
Yeah.
But his question was about the legality of the situation. And I think the lesson that taught me is that I had to answer him and say, between two consenting adults who agree to something like that, and if that's what they enjoy and that's what they want to do, that is legal. But if that wasn't between two consenting adults, of course, that wouldn't be something that was appropriate. And then I had to explain to him why it wasn't appropriate for his age to be watching something so explicit.
Yeah.
But that was in a group situation. And I think the thing that really taught me is that you will gain the respect of young people by answering the question that they asked. And I think that's what I want to share with people through doing this. Definitely. In that if you give them the information that they need, if you provide context to some of the scary things that they're exposed to and see in the world, and if you talk to them about boundaries, it can really have like a better outcome from that sort of situation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example as well of often when people, parents, professionals have asked me, I don't know when the right time is to speak about that. as soon as they start asking the question.
Yeah.
Not all the time, because we know young people aren't always going to initiate that.
Yep.
But that was the right time for that young person
That was
to know.
the right time,
because
yeah.
they'd seen something that was not okay for them to see.
Yeah.
But it had left them with questions and thinking, what do I do
Oh
with
my
this
gosh.
now?
Yeah, that must have felt really confusing and really like, and they could have felt like ashamed. And the thing is, when it comes to talking about sex or relationships, the biggest barrier to young people talking about what they're up to, accessing sexual health services, is shame and embarrassment. And so we just kind of need to cut that out, deal with that, and we'll all just crack on. That'd be great.
Lovely. Well,
excellent.
On that note,
I think we're done.
I think we're done. Thank you so much for listening to our first episode, our introductory episode of RSE for Grown-Ups. And we'll see you next time where we talk about Key Stage 1.
Thanks. Bye-bye.